Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, and with this video, I'd like to talk about the anime series Darling in the FranXX, which I really thoroughly enjoyed. It was something I came a little late to the party to because of all of the toxic, immature fan reaction to some of the things that were going on in the series. I'm not somebody who follows the hype train at all whatsoever. So when something along those lines actually gets my attention, it's something I have to look at and see what's going on with it. And so I had heard about the fan backlash and death threats and all that kind of stuff. And it really, stoked the fires of my ire. It raised my ire because I knew it was going to be about something stupid. And it was very much the case. When I did actually finally get around to watching the series, I think it was like, 10 or 12 episodes had been out, and that's when I got into it, marathoned them, and I've been with it ever since, all the way up to the finale, which just aired very recently as of the time of this recording. And as I posted over on my Facebook about the finale, I said it was beautiful and poetic in how it, sort of circled back around to all of those aspects and elements of youth and humanity, of perseverance and finding yourself as well as forging your own path, and really showcasing love, meaning, the warmth and support and compassion you show to others as being such an integral ingredient to what makes life really truly satisfying, which were things that were what really attracted me to it from the get-go. I mean, of course I'm a science fiction fan, and I loved all of the sci-fi stuff that was going on, aliens and klaxosaurs and everything like that, gene splicing, and how humanity had become very homogenized and self-contained, and after striving towards some level of immortality, and our whole main cast of characters, these were just another handful of children who over time had been, trained and guided and kept contained, and now they were reaching puberty and young adulthood, and they had been baby fed and handheld for so long. And it was kind of like little boy little girl lost, because there's so much of life and living that they were never taught, and they didn't understand, and they kind of had to find out, for themselves, and make those mistakes, and in their, social interactions, and the boys being attracted to the girls and vice versa. And there was some debate about, sort of homosexuality, how that would impact them, of pregnancy, and all of these really top tier adult mature concepts. And so all of those aspects were really drew me in and kept me, eyes peeled every time I was watching the series, and kept me coming back for more. Of course, the ongoing romance between Zero Two and Hiro was definitely, big doings. I did not, however, have a sense of reaction anywhere near approaching the, again, to use the term, toxic backlash, that had been twisted and born out of the character of Ichigo's sort of getting in between Zero Two and Hiro. And I just didn't get it. It was just such a momentary thing. An episode later, and her transgressions, air quotes, were already forgotten. People were so hyped up for this series, yet at one wrong turn they completely dropped any faith they had in the director, writer, and the studio and everything like that. They just went bananas. And it was undeserving and uncalled for, disdainful behavior. There's a certain level of it where it's like, if you're an anime fan, it's good to be a fan of things. It's good to be passionate about the things you are, a fan of, or have a passion toward. But, you have to learn some level of restraint as well, where these characters were going through many various growing pains throughout the course of the series. Some of the people, creating this backlash, they could probably stand to learn a thing or two about the same sort of growing pains. I feel like a lot of the people who were screaming and, raising their ire and their, pitchforks and torches online and everything, sending those death threats, are probably just as, self-contained in their everyday daily lives as these characters were. Only these characters were all on an evolutionary plateau that would see them growing out and going out into the world, and experiencing life and forging paths for themselves. Whereas the people going nutso were just more regressive, and they are showing no evolution of mind, body, and soul, and whatever like that. I mean, I don't know them. I don't know all the people personally who took to their screens, angrily and whatever like that, and sent those threats and went all nutso, as I say. But it's antithetical to that, the things that drew me to this series. As I say, this burgeoning youth spending so much of their lives contained and unknowing of the fundamentals, the building blocks of what a progressive life is, life and living and experiencing and going out into the world and just forging that path, learning to find oneself, learning what makes you who you are, what makes yourself tick. And the things you like, the things you don't like, the kind of people you want to interact with, the kind of people you want to avoid. All of these things were, an integral piece to anyone that is growing up, especially in those formative young adult teenage years. And to see this, set against this sci-fi backdrop with everything else that was going on. I mean, I've heard some people dismissing the last few episodes of the series as, what were they smoking? They were on some kind of drugs, with how everything took a turn. And I still found it utmost interesting because, as I say, all through it, there was the through line of the romance between Zero Two and Hiro, and that was big doings, again, to use my term. But then you had such interesting quirks of character and twists of fate, like Kokoro and Mitsuru getting together and then having their memories wiped, but then having her pregnant, her knocked up. And this pregnancy would be the herald that would hallmark the future of not only this group of characters, but of all mankind. And to see, Ichigo, who was so, disdained and so hated and caused fandom, the fan reactions, of backlash and death threats, this toxicity, she ends up with Goro. And I loved that. I loved in the finale, he just goes up before he's going to traverse the world and try to find other humanity that's surviving and try to get them all together and help them and everything like that. He just plants one right on her lips. And later we see they're having a kid together and everything. And it just, seeing the adult versions of all of the characters and knowing that they've got kids on the way, be fruitful and multiply. They took to that like nobody's business in the end. And that sort of spiritualistic way it all culminates, where it could very well have just gone out with that, and that would have been it. But in a very sort of way that reminded me of the anime Eureka 7. There was something about the romance between Hiro and Zero Two, and they're sort of spiritually these little colorful orbs coming back to Earth, and the tip of the hat in the end is that they've been reunited. They've been reincarnated, reunited so many decades, maybe millennia later. It's hard to tell exactly how much time has passed, but they both shared the sentiment, one day we'll go back. And it seems like the final sequence of the finale episode is a tip of the hat, a nod to say they've come back. They found their way home, and they found their way back to each other, so that in essence, it was a really happy ending. It was something that really moved me to tears when I watched it just hours ago, as of the time of this recording. And I just really, I have nothing but superlatives to say about my experience watching this series. It drew me in, and it kept me, enraptured by every twist and turn, everything that was happening. Some of the Klaxosaur alien invasion elements to the last stretch of episodes were a little strange, were a little odd, I will admit. I do kind of understand where people are coming from when they say, what were the people, who produced the series smoking, what were they on? This is the byproduct of drug addiction. I get it. I get what people are saying, like, and making those kinds of references. But it kind of, it's something I equate back to being like playing an RPG that you get invested in, like a Final Fantasy series, something like that, where you're so invested in the characters and you spend so much time with them and you see their growth and evolution, you experience it alongside them. And then when it gets to that final tier, those final tiers of the adventure, the game, you run into a handful of bosses, and around every corner, every boss battle you win, every boss you defeat opens the door to another evolved aspect of it. If you think of the character of Sephiroth in Final Fantasy VII or Ultimecia in Final Fantasy VIII, they had subsequent higher forms that would then be revealed as you would go through them and beat them, one after the other. It would get bigger and stronger and stranger, and that's kind of the aesthetic they went for in this series. And just to briefly touch upon, I guess, the sort of outstanding fan debate that's going back and forth. I don't know how long it's been going on, but it came to my attention recently over on Facebook. I saw a friend of mine posting along these lines about a comparison as far as mecha anime go between Evangelion and Darling in the Franxx, as far as, well, Darling in the Franxx now surpasses Evangelion as better and the best mecha anime ever and all this stuff. I'm not I'm not so chip on my shoulder as to weigh in on that argument. I will say they are both tremendous and great experiences for what they are, individually. I don't necessarily want to throw my weight around and say one is better than the other. I think Darling in the Franxx, the thing that it has going for it that could, and emphasis on the word could, slightly push it a little bit ahead of Evangelion for me, is the fact that the story stayed tried and true all the way to the end. There was still that thorough through line, and it wasn't as quizzical as Evangelion's ending was, where it was a very WTF ending for Evangelion, and lots of debate and philosophizing has been involved in trying to, compact it into an understandable what was going on in that series, whereas with Darling in the Franxx, they really truly stayed steadfast with the story they wanted to tell. And by the end, there is no questioning, well, where did Zero Two and Hiro end up? What happened to everyone? Did they suffer? Did they die? Did they survive? We know. And it's, sort of the most satisfying humanitarian end game without any qualms, without any leftover overhanging questions or concerns or discontinuity or WTF-ery, so that would be something in Franxx's favor, that it was a streamlined, story from beginning to end. There was a satisfying conclusion, at least for my part. The finale episode of the series just blew me out of the water, and got the waterworks going. And what more can you ask? Just an enjoyable experience overall, with very human characters on a very, sort of pathos-laden, evolution and evolutionary track. And these characters, they forged and they evolved. And we saw such progression, such great progression, all throughout. And it was set against this sci-fi backdrop, this sort of sci-fi fantasy world backdrop. And so many interesting philosophical and scientific and biological things were hanging in the balance as far as, what these characters had to face and debate for themselves and figure out for themselves. And so, for me, it was a hell of a series. It was a hell of a watch. And I couldn't more highly recommend you dedicating your time to, avoiding any hype train, any nonsense, any, fanatical discussion about it, whether pro or con. Just watch it of your own accord if you haven't already. Of course, if you're watching this video and I'm talking about it, it's kind of senseless then that you would go back and watch it, if you hadn't seen, it already. You wouldn't understand half the stuff I'm talking about. But, you know, I had a hell of an experience watching it, and I really just was motivated to come on and want to talk about it. And so I'll leave it there, and I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below if you watched Darling in the Franxx, if you enjoyed it as much as I did, if you got as much out of it as I did. I know a couple people I spoke to were like, this looks like crap. I'm not really going to dedicate my time to it. And, you know, I think it was a lot of judging the book by its cover, and there was a lot more going on once you started paging through it, so to speak, that I think, you know, the people who decided to avoid it missed out. You know, that's just my opinion on it. But, so yeah. Otherwise, that'll be pretty much it for me on this. Hope this video finds you well, and I'll catch you all later. Peace.